click. So very warm welcome. It's a great pleasure really to have you, and I'm kind of like looking around because I have also, I'm admitting people to the room while we are speaking. It is my great pleasure to welcome you in this session, and we have today's seminar with Dr. Evelien Geerts. And I should say a few words about Evelien, who holds a PhD from University California, Santa Cruz, and she's a multidisciplinary philosopher and postdoctoral researcher at the University of Birmingham, UK, working on the ERC-funded project Urban Terrorism in Europe 2004-2019, Remembering, Imagining and Anticipating Violence. Her research interests include new materialisms, as we will see in the session today, very much critical epistemologies, political philosophical questions of identity, difference and violence, and critical and diffractive pedagogies. She has published in Philosophy Today, Women's Studies International Forum, and Rhizomes, Cultural Studies and Emerging Knowledge, and is also a very avid philosophy meme creator and part of the Dutch Journal of Gender Studies editorial board. So the title of today's paper is New Materialist Hope-Focused Interventions in Times of Modern Human Crisis, a Critical Cartography. And as you see, some things have changed. So I think that having said that, I will just leave the floor to Evelien, and I will be the operator of also the slides. So I should probably be quiet right now and just kind of try to share the screen with you.
Yeah. Let me just wait. Okay. Oop.
Do you see well, or?
Yeah, my whole screen changed now. So let me, okay, great. Okay, well, let's get started then. Thank you so much, Marietta, for your wonderful and kind introduction. I would first, of course, like to thank the main organizers, so Cecilia, Jana, and Marietta, who is truly one of the most supportive post-humanist critic colleagues one could ever have. I'm honored to have been invited by the Posthumanities Hub to come and give a now digital seminar presentation on some of the work that I'm currently producing for my Critical New Materialisms monograph, and as part of the also just mentioned project at Birmingham University. And we will share the slides as a PDF later so that you can also now, before starting, and this slide 2, yeah, this is an overview of what I will be doing today. I want to accentuate that networks such as the Hub are more needed than ever before, given the multiple assemblages of more than human crises we are currently experiencing around the world right now, a topic that will, by the way, be the leitmotif of today's presentation in connection with materially grounded hope. Because of the elections in the United States, which I consider to be basically my second intellectual home in addition to Belgium, I actually decided to shift critical theoretical gears last minute and focus on the systematicity of interlinked, disruptive space-time querying crisis events that are currently plaguing us, as we all know, and sketch out how critical new materialisms consequently could revitalize our conceptual toolbox and the praxis of critical theory when responding to such troubling events, of which terrorist, counter-terrorist, and fascist political violence are but a couple of examples. So, focusing on the more overarching theme of more than human crises, it has crises in which the human, the non-human, the dehumanized, that would transcends the human subject, and basically all of the entanglements that can come about between these beings and phenomena. How they play a role, well, that might seem like a bold move instead of focusing on just terrorism, I guess. But I found myself in such a state of despair yesterday that I decided to present something more affirmative, something more hope-filled, and I hope that that will please you as well. I will, of course, still be referring to terrorism and political violence as crisis phenomena that are in need of new materialist conceptualizing. but I really wanted to prioritize the critical theoretical story of why what I call critical new materialist theorizing from the ground up matters so much in these crisis times. And that has everything to do with my own situated location, namely that of a multidisciplinary philosopher inspired by Deleuze-Guattarian and Freudian nomadic philosophies of affirmation, philosophies that basically, believe that crises of the present cannot be disconnected from past events and, well, the future that is yet to actualize itself. So let me focus, and that's slide 3. Let me focus on those disruptive crisis events for a minute to paint a more detailed picture. So following in Jacques Derrida's time-space querying footsteps in Spectres of Marx and in his interviews with philosopher of terrorism Giovanna Boradori, it is clear that man-made revolutions, global crisis moments, and other large-scale disorienting events have always been etched into our social cultural imagination as exceptional and at once timely and eerily untimely historic events. Although experienced differently around the world, it is because of that attributed exceptionality that various crisis events, such as the hyper-televised brute spectacle that was 9/11, could be interpreted as still wandering around in our imaginaries today. Each and every violent political state, power undermining or reinforcing act that gets framed as terrorist in the West these days, in a haunting way recites and rematerializes 9/11's almost ungraspable, surreal viciousness, therefore actually further reiterating the exceptionality and also time-space querying disruptiveness of 9/11, plus reifying the now global bio-necropolitical state apparatus that has come along with it. Now, I decided to still start with a reference to 9/11 as something similar appears to be going on with the COVID-19 crisis, I think. We all know it by now, the crisis and novel zoonotic disease provoked by SARS-CoV-2 that is suspected to have first been transmitted via non-human hosts in the fall of 2019, and that, with of course the assistance of extractive capitalism's infrastructure, rapidly turned into a full-blown pandemic. That's also the reason why I'm doing this inside my bedroom in Belgium right now, right? So this heavily mediatized COVID-19 outbreak, plus the intertwined patchwork of economic, ecological, and many other catastrophes it has caused since then, has confronted the world with an overwhelming experience of disorientation. Echoes Ahmed's words in queer phenomenology. And this feeling of disorientation has materialized itself as feeling lost in space, as orienting oneself often includes taking up a place in space, and also as feeling lost in time, the directions providing temporal framework that is usually only revealed to us when everything shockingly comes to a halt. This just to illustrate that crisis events, especially when reverberating globally, are space-time querying in nature and often lead to what Donna Haraway in 1988 already referred to as the phenomenon of epistemological shock therapy, as our standard vocabulary, theoretical toolkits and methodologies all of a sudden no longer really appear to correspond to our ontological reality. Now, this need for an epistemological reset, let's say, is what currently seems to be affecting us. So anno 2020, horrible year, basically, Hegelian idealism-based armchair philosophizing does not do the trick anymore, and I do have memes about that. And our human exceptionalist, metaphysical, individualism-driven discourses, ideas, effective modes, and praxes have run out of steam, to playfully quote Bruno Latour. We require a different worldly form of philosophizing rooted in the materialist tradition that could express the multiple assemblages of more than human crises we are currently confronted with, be it COVID-19, which brings together the long-pursued autonomous but not that autonomous human subject and the tiny invading inhuman virus, be it the haunting specter of fascism, very suitable topic right now, touching upon the relationship between the included citizen and the always excluded dehumanized, or events of political violence and terrorism and counterterrorism that engender questions of course, geopolitical power, identity, and also intersubjective relations. So a reinvigoration of critical thinking while fabricating new conceptual vocabularies and tools from within the material world to better capture a rapidly changing zeitgeist is thus needed. And this rethinking is expressed quite well by Haraway in Staying with the Trouble from 2016. And I've added the whole quote to the slide here, but I'm just going to read a small part of it. Quoting Haraway, it basically matters which stories tell stories, which concepts think concepts. We need stories and theories that are just big enough to gather up the complexities and keep the edges open and greedy for surprising new and old connections. But critical new materialist theorizing might provide us with such grounded, situated, and accountable stories that break out of the very constrictive humanist narrative. And to demonstrate this claim, I will now delve deeper into Haraway's oeuvre, which for me can actually be seen as scene setting for critical new materialist, hope-driven, but also not exceedingly optimistic or naive philosophy. So in our now very famous situated knowledges, which we probably already all know, Haraway reveals what it means to create knowledge from the ground up. She builds her argument upon Marxist, historical, and feminist materialisms, the rich tradition of feminist epistemology, and above all, of course, Sandra Harding's standpoint theory. Connecting the foregoing philosophies to the Foucauldian idea of power knowledge and a critique of disembodied objectifying vision, Haraway conceptualizes her materialist project along four crisscrossing axes, namely ontology, so theorizing what the world is, epistemology, theorizing about how to see the world as it is, ethics, theorizing why the world as it is and how it ought to be, and politics, theorizing how to effectively change the world from within, in this case. So it is in the thought-provoking assemblage of these four philosophical domains or axes that Haraway's eco-philosophy sets the framework for what this presentation conceptualizes as critical new materialisms. And we can go to the fourth slide. So right from the outset, Marietta? Yeah. Right from the outset, the ontological and epistemological axes of Haraway's situated knowledgeist philosophy are clear. So Haraway consistently argues against the dualist Western ontological model and the modern Cartesian somatophobic understanding of this worldview. Quote also says it here, feminist objectivity, as Haraway writes in Situated Knowledges, is about limited location and situated knowledge, not about transcendence and splitting of subject and object. Through and with the production of perspectivist yet not relativistic knowledges, Haraway returns agency to objects of knowledge and the formally objectified. As in her view, the world consists only of vibrant agents. Furthermore, she deconstructs the top-down epistemological model that is so common in the traditions of modern Western science and philosophy. Over-glorified subject, object, and nature culture splits have to make way for a framework of anti-cannibalistic, and I quote her again, partial, locatable, critical knowledges, end quote. Yet Haraway's onto-epistemology is more than a corrective project. It is also strongly visionary in nature. And this is actually where the critical new materialist element already pops up. So Haraway wishes to transform processes of knowledge production with the hope of engendering more socially just ways of doing science. And with her politics of situated knowledges, basically, Haraway aims to unravel the oppressive, dehumanizing ways in which the power of vision has been misused in Western scientific knowledge production in order to de-agentialize and objectify, to universalize parochial perspectives, and to promote knowledge production in non-accountable, supposedly innocent, yet often exploitative manners. Learning to reimagine the world and its beings as active, interrelated, and packed with agency is an inherently feminist, ethical, political undertaking, as it opens different opportunities for the production of knowledge and more wide-ranging ways via which certain embodied beings come to matter, as we've also learned from the philosophies of, for instance, Judith Butler, but also Sylvia Wynter, Karen Barad, and many more. Well, this project of situated knowledges, echoing throughout Haraway's oeuvre basically, is this onto-epistemological and ethico-political. This lift theory is really all about creating a feminist coalitional politics in which differences, diverse voices, lived experiences, and perspectives differently embodied subjects, and various ways of being and living are centered, as all perspectives should be included as long as they resist totalizing oppressive outcomes. Due to the thinking together of the ontological, epistemological, ethical, and political, the philosophy of situated knowledges has, since its emergence, substantially influenced those working in the social political transformation-focused fields of feminist epistemology, feminist science studies, and decolonial science studies, and also new materialist thinking. Indeed, overall, Haraway's oeuvre is recognized as laying the foundations of various new materialist philosophies, and specifically what I call critical new materialist philosophies, or those new materialisms that have been directly influenced by feminist, queer, and critical race studies. These critical theories basically bring to the table what in this presentation will be referred to as grounded hope, and because of their ethical political attachments, they're moreover also oriented towards social justice and focused upon creating transformation and change. Next slide. Because of its immense genealogical complexity, diversity, and liveliness, as well as its transcontinental transdisciplinary roots, new materialist theorizing requires a different approach than simply the empirical, chronological, or genealogical. Let me explain that for a second. So chronology-based approaches would not do justice to, I think, the temporal complexity of contemporary new materialisms, as they can overlook the relationality between new materialist philosophy and actually the various turns that preceded it. Nor does a genealogical overview a la Michel Foucault, which basically focuses on the conditions of coming into being of a discourse and or praxis, nor does a genealogical overview provide us with sufficient tools to fully capture new materialism's ongoing evolution. So to have a fuller overview of the current constellations of new materialist thought, and especially its more critical forms, a more materially grounded mapping methodology that considers new materialism's vivacity is needed, namely a Brydodian critical cartographical strategy. I will explain the strategy, which is actually at the same time also a new materialist methodology, after briefly taking stock of new materialist thought as a whole, which is basically impossible, but I will try to pinpoint at some characteristics. So having technically been coined, philosophically speaking, by Brydodi, but also Manuel de Landa in the mid-1990s, and having been described by Brydodi in an interview from 2012, as you can see here, and I quote, "A method, a conceptual frame, and a political stand, which refuses the linguistic paradigm, stressing instead the concrete yet complex materiality of bodies immersed in social relations of power. It is clear that new materialist philosophies are the product of immanently and situatedly theorizing from the ground up in the aftermath of poststructuralism and its sometimes radical social constructivism that reduced, or is said to have reduced, matter to the level of the linguistic discursive." So to give a sort of a definition, I would say that new materialisms painstakingly pay attention to the intricate microwebs of power as potestas and potentia, and control and surveillance, which human, non-human, and those that have been deemed less than human beings are all part of, and at times also productively are fighting against. And you see the Foucauldian influence here a little, of course. Yet, new materialisms, I would say, do not stay within the realm of these necrobiopolitics-infused microwebs and encounters. Whilst deconstructing and pushing Western binary anthropocentrism, human exceptionalism, and other dichotomized constructions to the brink, an active relational and meso and also macro level based caring for the environment, the world, and its inhabitants are revealed. So this more holistic approach, I would say, to all types of lively assemblages characterizes most contemporary new materialist philosophies. Nature and all that is of material, cultural, digital nature is furthermore regarded as pushing and punching back and put at the forefront of new materialist theorizing, which gives that specific strand of thought what I would call a critical eco-ethico-political touch. New materialisms such as the philosophies of Haraway, but also Barad, Elizabeth Cross, Jane Bennett, and Brydodi to just name a few, are united by an investment in the idea, basically, that every little piece of matter matters, and therefore can be read as critiques of the ongoing brutal economization, it's a difficult word, exploitation and sheer destruction of living matter in all of its existential differing forms. So basically, which bodies come to matter and why. That should suffice, I think, for a brief kind of sketch, although new materialisms cannot be contained by the definitional. Yeah? Now, to return to our critical cartographical methodology, Rosi Braidati no longer needs an introduction, I think. So Braidati's critical cartographical project is part of her new materialist nomadic philosophy. It is grounded in a situated politics of location that reminds us of Adrian Rich. And Braidati's methodology additionally is rooted in Foucauldian genealogy, but also transcends it, as it is, and I quote Foucault's Nietzsche genealogy and history piece here, operating on a field of entangled and confused parchments on documents that have been scratched over and recopied many times. Critical cartography does not revolve around, and I quote Foucault again, the search for origins, nor does it seek the creation of indefinite teleologies, or to recover the unbroken continuity, end quote, of history, as Foucault puts it in the same essay. So map making is meant to happen slowly and with an eye for detail, just like constructing, these Foucauldian genealogies, let's say. But critical cartography demands more from us as knowledge producers than merely creating a history of the present, which is what Foucauldian genealogy in the end boils down to. There needs to be a certain openness towards the future, a clear engagement with the map makers' geopolitical situatedness, as well as an accentuation of accountability for the creation of one's knowledge claims, as Braidati also underlines in Nomadic Subject. Leaving out the Deleuze-Guattarian and critical geographical route for the sake of time here, I would then say that a critical cartographical method, to put it in Braidati's words on the slide here as well, is a theoretically based and politically informed reading of the present that presents us with both analytic and exegetical tools for critical thought and also creative theoretical alternatives. So let me put all these pieces together for a second. In times of global crises such as these, I would say that a multi-layered critical cartography is needed, in which multiple levels of worldly complexity are at work. For Braidati, subjects should be regarded as particularly situated, embodied, and always in a state of becoming. Simultaneously, however, it is important to be mindful that these neoliberal capitalist techno-scientific times that we're living in are ruled by so-called newfangled grand but ever so fragmented quasi-borderline narratives, such as an all-determining, self-disciplining neoliberal governmentality and a polarizing us-them localizing politics, of which we're seeing the results today, I think. Therefore, we must also realize that the carnal materiality of subjects more than ever before makes them genetically manipulable, commodifiable, and potentially disposable, as Braidati, but also thinkers such as Melinda Cooper and Denise Ferreira da Silva have noted. Just gonna check my time here. Yes, next slide, great. So, it is clear that Haraway's eco-philosophy has inspired Braidati in the designing of her critical cartography because of its shared accentuation of situatedness, accountability, and an intricate power analytics. We discovered that in such a project, the realms of ontology, epistemology, ethics, and politics are necessarily taught together. This idea is also echoed in the work of Barad, whose agential realism is yet another imprint, I would say, of critical new materialist philosophy that has its roots in the more Anglo-American praxis of feminist science studies. Now, I won't go deep into the details of all the various constellations of critical new materialist thought here, again, for the sake of time. But for those that are interested in these basically different approaches and constellations, I would like to refer to the digital critical cartography of new materialist thought that I have designed with Utrecht University's Digital Humanities Lab. And what I'm going to do is I'm basically going to quickly share the.
So I will stop sharing the slides.
Yeah, and I will share mine. Awesome. Okay. Can you all see this? Yeah. So this is just to give you a quick overview of what my brain looks like. No, I'm just kidding. But this is the digital critical cartography that I basically created after basically doing citational political research, but also index research and conceptual research. And then I turned it into a whole data collection. And on the basis of that, I basically put all the different constellations of my cartography of new materialisms, post-humanist thinking, and affect theoretical theory together. You will find the link on the PDFs as well, but what I just wanted to show you is that you can basically play with it a bit. And don't ever design things like these at the end of your dissertation process because it will drive you mad, just a tip. But so if you type in Donna Haraway, you can immediately see the other critical new materialist thinkers that are connected to Haraway's work. And what immediately becomes clear is that there is actually a huge connection to be made between Haraway and Barad, for instance, because they have that shared genealogy of feminist science studies in particular, and of course also, yeah, more Anglo-American versions of standpoint theory. There is actually a feminist science studies link. So again, if you type in feminist science studies, you see all of the thinkers that have been added to the map that are basically working with that genealogy. So Alexis Shotwell is someone that we can name here, Kim Thalberg, who combines indigenous perspectives with decolonial science studies and so forth. Yeah, you can keep clicking on it, but that's going to take us too far. What I wanted to show is that you have these feminist science studies, let's say, oriented critical new materialists. At the same time, of course, you also have more critical new materialist thinkers that are working with the work of Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari. Braidotti is, of course, a name that immediately pops up, but you also have people like Jasper Puar, who combines Foucauldian thinking with Deleuzian assemblage thinking, Elizabeth Bross and Mel White-Shen. And then you have people like Latour, who I already referred to, and Graham Harman, for instance, who basically I placed kind of outside the realm of critical new materialist thinking because they're not as invested in, let's say, a strict power analytics. We can discuss that later if you want to. But so I just basically wanted to give you an example of how such a cartography could look like if you start designing it. And I'll stop sharing my screen now, and then Marietta, you can go back to the
Okay, excellent.
Slide.
I'm sorry, my screen is a bit sometimes rebelling against me. We are back at that slide, right?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. So I do want to focus on Barad's agential realism real quick because it will bring us to a fuller overview of those critical new materialisms that I've been talking about a lot already. So agential realism, as mostly presented in Meeting the Universe Halfway, is a post-humanist relational philosophy that takes Haraway's binary disrupting eco-philosophy seriously. And in such an agential realist framework, the world itself is seen as a material actor with the power of responding to and even resisting human intervention. So it is within this framework, which does not want to make matter and non-human actors passively pliable, that the neologism ethico-onto-epistemology arrives. If, as Haraway already suggested in the Cyborg Manifesto, but also Situated Knowledges, agency is de-anthropomorphized, the world and its various inhabitants are seen as interactively engaging with one another on a daily basis. So by radicalizing Haraway's doctrine critique, let's say, Barad's ethico-onto-epistemology emphasizes that we as thinkers, teachers, activists, and practitioners are so entangled with the world and its becoming that it is impossible to produce innocent, value-free knowledge, basically, which still isn't the same as relativism, but we can come back to that later. So Philosophizing, and this is important, itself therefore becomes, and I quote Barat here from Meeting the Universe Halfway, a material engagement with the world. Echoing the important words of Rich, Haraway, and Braidotti, Barat describes the inherently interwoven nature of the ontological, the epistemological, and the ethical, and the necessity of honoring that complex material web as follows, and the quote has been had it here. To theorize is not to leave the material world behind and enter the domain of pure ideas, where the lofty space of the mind makes subjective reflection possible. Theorizing, like experimenting, is a material practice. If thinking and producing knowledge about the world can and should only happen from within the world, then where does that leave the political? Well, because of the clear links with Foucauldian philosophy and the enterprises of feminist epistemology and science studies, I read Barat's comments on these ethical onto epistemological entanglements with research and science as also applying to the political realm. In other words, knowledge production that is rooted in a concrete matter or concrete materiality is about measuring what is going well in the world and what is not. It is about politically and positively transforming the world via knowledge that has been accountably produced. Now, if we were to go back to the methodology of critical cartography, but also diffractive thinking, another new materialist methodology that I've touched upon elsewhere, then it is clear that these methodologies embody an explicit knowing and being. And this is an important notion that I want you to remember. So the new materialist map maker and diffractive thinker both constantly demonstrate that they are trying to get attuned to the world and the phenomena that surround them. Knowing and being, with all of its ethical political connotations it carries, quite literally means that these methodologies are taking us as formerly presumed almighty researchers on an eventful ride, forcing us to realize that the phenomena surrounding us are not just out there waiting to be discovered and heard, but are in fact already speaking to us, knotted in lively relationalities and basically matters of their own. Now, moving back to Haraway and that earlier referred idea of, go back, of grounded hope, Haraway's ethical political orientation, together with her emphases on sympoiesis, expresses the idea that modern human exceptionalism and individualism are simply illusions, right? So illusions fabricated in order to counter the impermanence that we as humans feel upon realizing we are in a relation of making with all other material beings. This making with goes along with Haraway's critique of progressive teleological time and her call to make with the here and now, or said differently, to cultivate a mode of careful attentiveness towards the present. Now, such attentiveness does not keep pushing responsibility or responsibility, as Haraway so aptly reconceptualizes the notion via Levinasian philosophy. It doesn't push responsibility away, but it rather fully embraces it, and all the inherent difficulties that might entail. So whilst Haraway acknowledges the importance of looking at past ethical political failures and wrongdoings, as well as future earthly possibilities, she also points at the, and I quote, staying with the trouble here now, the all too ordinary urgencies of unrushing multi-species extinctions, genocides, immiserations, and exterminations. Avoiding the pessimistic, apocalyptic language of impending doom, which is hard to not give into in 2020, guided by a healthy dose of materialist realism, Haraway thus redirects our perspective towards the imminent present. Seen from Haraway's viewpoint and also via the perspectives of various other critical new materialists, I've already named a few, Mel White-Chen, Maria Puig de la Bella Casa, Alexis Shotwell, Braidotti, etc., and I quote Haraway, another world is not only urgently needed, but the creation of such a world is also possible, if only we become more attentive and caring to what is unfolding itself today. Now, are such attentive acts of staying with the trouble then to be founded upon the creation of utopian sandcastles, if they are not to be rooted in apocalyptic, pessimistic gloom? Not quite. Neither hope nor despair, but rather an attentive, situated staying with the trouble is the action the Thulacene demands. The Thulacene is Haraway's notion for what she considers to be our post-Anthropocene era, in which we will be required to pick up the pieces and reshape the world sympathetically in a situated, earthly, and relational manner. Yet, do Haraway's anxieties explicitly concern hope? And this is supposed to be the topic of this presentation, obviously. So, do they explicitly concern hope? Haraway's apprehensions are certainly related to her critical take on religious savior narratives, scientific positivism, and crudely optimistic transhumanist beliefs. However, do they transcend the effect of longing to want something better for the future? I would suggest not really, as we are talking about a thinker that explicitly uses the language of manifestos, dream work, and science fiction to think the practice of critique anew, to think with in order to criticize in the contemporary. But what Haraway thus seems to be arguing against is a non-situated, unrealistic take on hope that endlessly keeps deferring responsibility to future times. So Haraway refuses to get lost in the creation of abstract utopias, but is not necessarily against the cultivation of what I call grounded hope. And critically, cartographical speaking, this is where Haraway, the just mentioned list of critical new materialists and several critical historical materialists from the past, such as Ernst Bloch and Walter Benjamin, find each other, proving that new materialist thought is all about actually updating past materialist concepts, about reinvigorating critical theory. Now, and we're still on the same slide, I won't contextualize the Frankfurter Schule here, but what is important to note is that Benjamin and Bloch, with respectively their notions of Jetztzeit, so now time, and hope, could be retroactively read as an example of both Haraway's and other critical new materialists' eagerness to stay with the trouble, further anchoring new materialist work in the rich philosophical tradition that is materialism. Let's quickly delve into Benjamin, and then I'll start wrapping things up. So in his thesis on the philosophy of history, Benjamin also rethinks linear time as the time of the glorified conquerors. And he does so in a dissonant historical materialist time-space querying manner, bringing him close to Derrida and Haraway, all while linking it to his imagery of the Angelus Novus, or the Angel of History, which you see depicted here by that painting from Klee. So hoping to fix past wrongdoings and build something new on top of ruins, an almost eerie anticipation of the horrors yet to come during World War II, one could say, the Angel of History pauses and faces the past that has resulted in present-day urgencies. However, the angel is unable to pause for long as a storm labeled progress immediately pushes the angel forward again, with his eyes now fully focused on the connections between the past and the here and now. It is this openness to the past from within the here and now that matters, I would say, as oppression and political fascism are not exceptional, but are in fact perennially present manners, as Benjamin also states. Wanting to liberate the proletariat, Benjamin introduces now time, Jetztzeit, as a messianic replacement for homogeneous, empty linear time that operates at the heart of capitalist and politically oppressive societies. History for Benjamin should no longer be about the past lived experiences of the victorious. Rather, it should, and I quote him here, seize hold of a memory as it flashes up at a moment of danger. History and the art of theorizing history and critical theory are therefore about creatively capturing those energetic ruptures that are attached to various states of emergency or crisis events. The theorizing of these ruptures could potentially engender true social-political transformation. There's much more to be said about Benjamin, obviously, and his rather transcendent but also quite imminent messianism. But what suffices for here is that his philosophy is all about cultivating that which Haraway labels as situated perspectivist knowledge, and more importantly, seeing what is at stake in the world and cultivating well-grounded hope. So past specifically missed opportunities for the coming into being of unactualized potentialities, or more eloquently put, revolutionary justice and redemption, and present does need to meet if the future were to arise. And that sounds quite Deleuzian, actually, which is interesting. Now, this is a thought that has also been expressed by Benjamin's contemporary and friend, Ernst Bloch, in his The Principle of Hope. Also combining Marxist thought and Jewish messianism, Bloch's philosophy introduces the idea of a concrete political utopia, guided again by a materially rooted, situated cultivation of hope, driven by, and I quote him here, an ontology of the not yet, which again reminds us, I guess, of the Deleuzian virtual. Human subjects constantly strive towards the realization of the yet to come, or to put it more concretely, freedom, and they do so by cherishing hope for the future. In Bloch's existentialist and thus still humanist view, human subjects are hungry for the actualization of their own self-potential and can visualize transforming the world for the better through dreaming, which reminds us of Haraway. Moreover, there is a repository of failed and undeveloped actions and ideas in the past to which we can return to so as to transform the world for the better. This potential queering and bridging of temporalities emphasized by Bloch strongly reminds us of Derrida, Benjamin, and Haraway, of course. Importantly, the feeling of hope that Bloch refers to is neither naive nor disconnected. Hope in the utopian should always be constructed as materially rooted for it to work. And you can change the slide.
Sorry.
That was too fast, but that's good. So,
yeah.
Thank you, Lou. I can see the chat, yeah. So the cultivation of well-grounded hope and attentiveness does play a role in past and contemporary critical thought, and especially in critical new materialisms that theorize from the ground up as knowing and being as entangled with the worldly events they are analyzing. This point is underlined by Braidotti as well in Transpositions and in the Posthuman, in which Braidotti invests in, and I quote from the Posthuman now, actively constructing social horizons of hope. And she does so through posthumanist ethics that wishes to respect all beings. Hope matters and is indeed related to the what is yet to come, as Braidotti has also emphasized in an interview from 2012. This is a huge quote. I'm just going to read a small part of it. So Braidotti there basically says, the pursuit of practices of hope rooted in the ordinary micro practices of everyday life is a simple strategy to hold, sustain, and map out sustainable transformations. Hope is a way of dreaming up possible futures, an anticipatory virtue that permeates our lives and activates them. So feelings and dreams of hope that affirm social political transformations are still possible, as long as we remain in tune with what is going on in the world today, and that is a lot. Thus, there should be no imagined futures without a more situated and self-reflexive rethinking of present unfoldings and of what could be in relation to such unfoldings. Critical new materialist foreseeing praxis of attentiveness furthermore includes the realization that we, humans, non-humans, companion species, oddkin, the formerly dehumanized, the more than human, the environment at large, are all in this together, but of course also differently situated and located. We need to, and I quote Haraway as well here, live and die well with each other in a thick present. And the only way to do so is by becoming aware of the radical potential of cultivating situated knowledges, shared relationalities, and responsibility for all that is and remains in the process of becoming. It is fair to say that critical new materialisms, which for me, again, to summarize things, they pay attention to the intricate microwebs of power, control, and surveillance that have also dehumanized certain beings and so forth. Well, these philosophies that does have this very strong power analytics at their heart, basically, they cultivate well-rooted hope for the future. And that while at the same time carefully accentuating the thickness of the present and our shared responsibilities today. One of the urgencies to think with at the moment could of course be terrorist, political violence, and the spirit of fascism that has never quite left the continent. And these are issues that we can obviously discuss more during the Q&A that is about to follow. But for now, to round up everything, it is no overstatement to close this presentation with the claim that critical new materialist thought actually accentuates the need to think differently through thinking with the present and the urgencies of the moment, so that a better future, one more attuned to worldly affairs and more than human crises, might materialize itself. And cultivating situated hope is one way of getting there, I think. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Evelien. I think that, you know, you deserve this, but I would just maybe stop sharing the screen right now. Of course, there is a list of references here, and I'm sorry for all the, you know, glitches with sharing the screen, because apparently, you know, people were entering the waiting room, and then, you know, then the sharing the screen was like disabled, whatever. Anyway, I mean, this has been quite a lot of food for thought, and really fantastic paper. I think a lot of things to think through. What I forgot to say when we entered this room actually was actually a few words about the structure of this session. So as you see right now, we had a little bit of a tour de force of the full paper. And now actually, I would like to invite you for 10 minutes of, you know, just break to stretch or get some coffee or I don't know, whatever you need. We'll share the PowerPoint in the chat.
I just did.
Oh, you did? But after we reconvene, we'll have a Q&A session. And because there's quite a bunch of us in the room, I think that, you know, speaking of technicalities, I think the easiest is when you have a question to, you know, just give a sign in the chat so that we know we can kind of follow the right sequence, because otherwise we wouldn't see maybe your hands or something. So if you already have questions, I mean, just write down that you have a question, and then, you know, we kind of let you speak once we reconvene after the break. So let us then just have a 10-minute break, and we reconvene 2:12. So thank you so much. So I'm kind of, thank you so much for the thumbs up. I'm just kind of like, you know, I stopped like or started recording again. Thank you. Excellent. So just to kind of recap or remind from what was said when it comes to just technicalities, because there is so many of us here in the room. The magic recipe for the Q&A is that please just, you know, write down in the chat box that you have a question. I mean, you can write the question, but I think that you can just write that, you know, that you would like to ask the question, so that we can kind of manage with, you know, with the sequence and with like double screens to be able to actually, you know, see everyone who wants to engage in the discussion. So basically, you know, having said that, I would say the floor is yours. So if you have a question, could you just type that, you know, the word question, and we'll, both Jana and myself will see in the chat box, and we can just, you know, follow up on that. Anyone would like to start? Go on, Cici. I mean, not written in the chat, but go on.
I didn't have time to finish my question in the chat, actually.
Okay. Yeah.
But just to kickstart a lively conversation and us thinking together. First of all, thank you so much, Evelien, for a wonderful presentation. It was really, really, as many people wrote in the chat, very, very nourishing. And I thoroughly enjoyed your approaches to genealogy, to creating cartographies, and the actual hard work that you did with producing this digital tool for the cartography of concepts and names. So I have a little bit of a question, if you could think with us, you know, out loud, creatively and critically. Would there be other ways of creating these kinds of cartographies or maps, because every PhD student has to do that kind of exercise in their dissertation, so it's and then you have to continue to do it throughout your academic career. So would you have any kind of critical ideas on this? How could one do this differently, maybe not based on names and concepts? Could there be practices? I'm thinking about, you're referring to feminist science studies, and I mean that's a whole field with a lot of empirical work also behind all the conceptual gifts that have come out of that. Do you have any wise thoughts on this for us?
Wise thoughts? I don't know. But yes, no, thank you for your question, Cecilia. It's actually a really good question. It's also a question that has been plaguing me quite recently since I started my my postdoctoral research at Birmingham University, where I'm supposed to do more field philosophical work and thus have to kind of really, I'm not going to say start applying conceptual frameworks to events, because of course, seen through a critical new materialist perspective, events and worldly theorizing kind of happen at the same time in the encounters with the events, between the events and the researcher as such. So that's a really good question. The first thing that I could say is that critical cartographies are extremely personal because they depend on basically, I would say, the geopolitical location and also situatedness of the map maker as such. So coming at it from my philosophical training, I would say, hence, that's exactly the reason why I chose concepts and authors. I guess for people, and I know that there are a couple of people in the room that are focusing on art and new materialist approaches to art and performances and so forth, that they would tackle it differently, and that they would, for instance, use specific performance pieces. I also know that there are a couple of SDS people in the room. They would indeed maybe go into the lab or follow, and then this could be a potential way of constructing a different critical cartography, following the phenomenon that you are researching. So maybe, Haraway's Onco mouse, for instance, and then tracking the relationalities between the Onco mouse, the cancer research as such, and genetic manipulability of animals and humans. So I think it really has to do with your own critical kind of positionality and situatedness. And it's kind of up to decide to the map maker themselves how to then approach that, I think. But I'm pretty sure other people might have some interesting perspectives to share. So I guess that's possible too, right, Marietta, that other people jump in?
Yeah, yeah, of course. I mean, but also I think that maybe I'm thinking that this might actually relate to Udo's question, perhaps, because I mean, I see cartography question in the chat box. So
I wanted to add on. Hello, Evelien. Thank you.
Hi.
Great to see you again.
Yeah.
I was say 1 or 2 generations earlier than new materialism, there was Frederick Jameson, who had this idea of cognitive mapping. And I was wondering whether this Braidotti idea of cartography, or in what way does it really differ? That would, I have maybe a little extra questions, but can we start with that? Is that?
Yeah. I'm not a Jameson fanatic, okay. So could you maybe quickly sketch out like the core idea of cognitive mapping, and then I'll try to connect it to Braidotti's cartography.
Right, because I basically think the idea is very similar. It's mapping out. Wow, I didn't prepare this. Sorry, but so I didn't look it up. I'm sorry. But it's also mapping a field. He didn't draw it, of course. He just it's more a metaphor for writing in his case, and where it's meant to map forces that are active in a certain field where you're busy, and to make action possible.
Yeah.
And so that's how I see this hopeful, this metaphor of hope, which relates to that. So I can run and look for the book to really find a proper quote, but so.
I have one. I was just typing it in. Cool. Do you want me to read it?
Please.
So Jameson basically says that the notion of a cognitive map enables a situational representation of the part of the individual subject to that vaster and properly unrepresentable totality, which is the ensemble of society structured as a whole.
Exactly.
So it's fantastic, right? So what I'm getting from this is that Jameson, if I'm not mistaken, has to be kind of located more in like Lacanian psychoanalysis, or at least has been inspired by that, and also refers to what is called the semiotic square, which is also sort of a virtual map. So I think there are actually looking at that. So for him, I think it's a cognitive map is kind of a way to then like grasp structures as a whole and represent them. And I think that in representation, maybe that's where one of the differences lies. So I didn't have time because you could write a whole book about how Braidotti kind of sets up this critical cartographical method. Obviously, it has Foucauldian background, so power knowledge, as I pointed to. It's really inspired by post-colonial and critical geographical thinking, which is the whole part that I left out, because map making obviously is also about capturing a reality in a way and then representing it, and it really depends on how you frame things. So it really involves all these geopolitical relations, which I think Jameson doesn't necessarily refer to because it's focused on the semiotic more.
I would not agree. I don't think Jameson is focused on semiotics. Well, I mean, it's in this cultural logic essay where he comes up with this. Maybe earlier, but he brings it up again there. Yeah. And I think it's a way of orienting yourself in the field of cultural expressions, basically all kinds of cultural practices. Yeah. And in what way you could be effective based on a political stance. So
well, that's
I think I find it very similar. And actually I like that you connected what you did to Benjamin, the Frankfurt School, because I sometimes find a lot of new materialists are so leftist or Marxist, traditional leftist, which I find it's a bit superficial. It's like setting up strawmans against which you are. Yeah. So, okay, thank you for the answer. I would have a little extra question to the mapping part.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I'm really like it, because I'm an architect, and so for me it's drawing things up, and I tried. It's what I think is part of map mapping is normally also a kind of index.
Yeah.
And
I can show it. I'll do
cool.
it again with Zoom. Yeah.
Yeah. And which the kind of how you call it, the table of colors that you use in etchings and line types, which represent something of the real out there. And so this is something, I mean, because your cartography reminds me a bit of a kind of how you call it, these maps. Forgot how do you call it? It's I don't find the name. Anyway, I was wondering whether it's does it have a this, how you call it, this index where it has a name?
Yeah, index. I don't know, what is it? Do you know it in German?
I'm sorry, I cannot find my words anymore.
It's okay. Can I maybe pick in on two things that you said, and then because there are two things that I wanted to jump in on. And first of all, your comment about this is crucial, I think, and I'm going to stop sharing this. The comment about new materialisms maybe not always emphasizing, their own genealogies enough, which I kind of agree with. And so one of the most important things for me in my work is to, when I'm mapping out critical new materialist thinking as such, is to actually show that there is a whole, obviously, thousands of materialist traditions that have come before that these thinkers are kind of latching onto again in a very respectful, affirmative manner to kind of update it for the here and now. So somebody like Braidotti, and this is, the typical name, of course, to go through, but she does it very well and very affirmatively, is by going back to that whole feminist endpoint theoretical tradition, which is actually rooted in Marxist thinking, and its liberational potential, which is rooted in critical historical materialist thinking, is connected to Haraway's situated knowledges, feminist science studies projects, and so forth. I find it really important to latch onto that and also show that these materialist thoughts have already been theorized. What we just need to do now is kind of be accountable towards these ideas and also kind of update them for the here and now. So I really like that point. And then of course the map, when you're talking, and I need to look at the cognitive mapping a bit more, I would say that it is probably very similar, but that Jameson probably has a different starting point than Braidotti or that I or you would have, and that it, in that sense, differs. But one thing about the critical cartography, the digital one that I just showed, I'm also aware of the fact that this is very ironical in a way to kind of show a representation of new materialist thinking where, you know, as new materialist thinking and posthumanist thought is supposed to move beyond representationalism. So I get the irony. I wanted to kind of accentuate that. At the same time, yeah, you sometimes do have to map things out for it to become a kind of pedagogical tool. So yeah.
No, actually, the word I was looking for is a mind map. It reminds me a lot of a mind map.
Yeah.
And which is indeed very personal. It just helps you to put stuff on the paper and structure it. Yeah. But okay.
Thank you. I think I would jump now here to kind of make sure there is space. Thank you so much. Right, so I mean, just to go with the sequence, I have Juliana first with the comment, then Nina, and then Louise.
Oh, you're muted.
Yes, unmute yourself, Juliana.
Hi, excellent. Sorry, thank you. Hey, Evelyn.
Hi.
Nice. I'm so sorry I missed your talk, but it's a good a time as any to jump in right now, just to maybe give my 5 cents, because even now the conversation is really interesting. You probably know as well as me that I'm not only a researcher, I'm an educator, and I'm also an artist and sound and performance artist. So, you know, performative gestures for me have always been key to how I move around in my art practice, and how I use sound as a material force or intensity. What I would like to comment on is that I'm back teaching again, back in Montreal, and I'm teaching a course called The Body, the Arts, and the State. And I'm actually using my new knowledge production to actually inform my students about new materialism, in the sense that I guess now that you've been talking a lot about mapping, I always see myself positioned, probably, if you want to mention Whitehead and process philosophy, as always being starting from the middle. And this also, for me, is extremely important to sharing this notion with my students, because it opens up a lot of ways or channels for students to actually be actively involved without thinking like, where's my starting point? Where do I go from here? And I've actually given them now for their midterm assignment the idea that they can either write a little bit of what they've been introduced to through new materialism, and understanding feminist new materialism, because this is for me so important too, which I think you just touched on, the whole idea about feminist genealogies and not working chronologically. I think in terms of teaching art theory, what I'm finding is that by starting in the middle and not having to dictate knowledge, you know, starting from a certain year and the sort of, you know, art historical way of teaching certain genres in art, or the history of art, and especially with this course, you know, because I'm referring to the state, I'm referring to the arts. I find that because I'm teaching remotely right now, it's a good a time as any to start from the middle, because students now are trying to make a relationship to what's happening outside. They're very scared, they're very fearful, and actually trying to make these slits or these vertical cuts and bringing in things that have not been mentioned before and talked about, and using these ideas as a form of protest, perhaps, you know, if you're relating that to Black Lives Matter, or you're relating it to the climate through Alamo. I've been giving them some readings from Stacy. I'm just saying, feeding them slowly with those things, and at the same time giving them the option to do performative gestures, for me is a way to kind of introduce or my form of mapping and facilitate that. So it's just a comment basically, yeah, on what's been said so far. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Juliana. That's actually really interesting. I like the performative gestures idea and the starting from within the middle, which I also need to start doing more, I think, but I'm sometimes so stuck in like my conceptual imaginaries. But thank you. It was really interesting.
Thank you so much. That's a really, really exciting discussion. But now I'm passing the baton to Nina.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I'm very sorry I did not hear the first part because I wasn't aware that you should register for this. So
Sorry, it's my fault.
Yes, time to sending the link in the middle of everything. So I didn't. I hope I can make up for that at another time. However, I was actually wondering about the how you would and perhaps you have already said something about it in the first part, but how you would relate the notion of figurations to this, because I actually think, I mean, to me, I think that the notion of figurations is so very much, I mean, a cartographic, I mean, to cartography of figurations, which somehow is a way of linking the, I mean, the very empirical, sensual, concrete, desirable, whatever, and the conceptual, and also doing it these boundaries where hope is actually produced, the boundaries between the critique of the here and now and somehow the reaching out for something else that and elsewhere, as Haraway talked about it, which. And I do, in order to come into the previous discussion on the Marxist tradition, I actually think that this is precisely where the Marxist tradition, even though I agree that it's important to look at these other materialisms, other materialist traditions, I think that the whole issue of desire is where the Marxist traditions somehow. And also linking the desire to the situatedness, because because the figuration is also the desired figuration also of the researcher, so to speak. Yeah, well, that was somehow question, comment, whatever.
Yeah. No, thank you so much, Nina. It's actually really interesting. The idea of figurations immediately brings me to Haraway as well. So figurations, fabulations, sci-fi, reimaginings, and things like that. It would actually be very interesting to kind of draw up a critical cartography of figurations, as you say, and by tracing it back to, I guess, all of the, feminist sci-fi thinkers, and actually tackling the issues that are at stake right now in the world through such a critical cartography of figurations. And that might actually be a very interesting project to look at. I've written it down. Yeah. I don't know if I actually want to, if I have any comment with regards to that, more than that would be a great way of investigating things as well. So, is that okay? Is anyone else? Yeah, Octavia Butler, yes. I see Juliana writing something in the chat. Yeah. Oh, maybe something quickly before a minute. So what I was thinking also when Nina was talking about the figurations thing, what I really like about that, maybe more than the ways that I've approached this during the presentation, is that figurations in a way also has a kind of, I wouldn't say fluidity, but a kind of sense of movement, sense of the processual or something entangled with it, which might make it very interesting to track how certain concepts and ideas kind of change throughout time. So yeah, that's what I was thinking about. Yeah, sorry, Marietta.
Okay, thank you so much. I mean, then I'm just passing the baton to Louis, who was the next person asking the question. Yeah.
Yes, hello. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Perfect.
Thank you so much, Evelien, for your wonderful talk. It's really amazing and very nice to learn about your research. I wanted to go back to the map you created with the digital humanities people in because I was wondering very practically what kind of tools for data visualization did you use to create that map, and why did you choose certain software or tools over others? I'm asking the question also because I am trying to develop something similar, so a kind of map in the literal sense that does justice to this project of critical cartography by Dottie and others. Yeah. And I find it rather difficult to choose what kind of data visualization to use, because these technologies are also non-innocent, right? Yeah. So I was wondering why, what did you use and why?
So that's a really good question. And I have to go way back because, I don't know, the past few months have seemed like years. So what I actually did is, I think way at the beginning, I started thinking about how I would, because I was dealing with that, like on the one hand, I wanted to visualize certain things. At the same time, I was also thinking about, of course, the critique of representationalisms that are so ingrained in the new materialist thinking. So that was a tricky topic and a tricky idea to kind of overcome. I wanted to initially do something more database-like, in which I would manually track concepts, because I do focus on the conceptual and like how concepts become, rewritten and reinvigorated. And I wanted to I started manually tracking certain concepts in different authors' works. The problem, of course, was that this is already a non-innocent kind of practice, as you also emphasized, because while you're, for instance, reading Braidati and going through the index and then like reading Denise Ferreira da Silva, for instance, and seeing that certain concepts and ideas overlap, you're already excluding other authors and other thinkers that could easily be included if you were to take a look at their books and indexes, obviously. So that was one, I guess, pitfall or two pitfalls already that I had to deal with. When it comes to the visualization tools itself, I neatly left that to the digital humanities lab people, because I had some ideas and I wanted to code stuff, but I wasn't really good at that. I can look it up if you want to. I have a whole part of that as part of my dissertation project. And I have it here as well. I can't really remember which thing they used, so I really need to look it up. It was actually an open software program that they used to visualize. And then we sat together about how to best, because I did the data collection, and again, that was a non-innocent process already. And then I kind of basically, in order to make the notes smaller and bigger, basically, because for instance, let me take a notion, analytics of power. You can see that some of the little notes are smaller and bigger than others. I made a whole Excel list of almost 120 pages, unfortunately, giving numbers to the appearance and, let's say, the force of appearance of certain concepts in all of these authors. So Latour, for instance, gets a smaller, it's always Latour basically that you need to criticize for some great reason, huh? Latour gets a smaller note because the power analytics isn't as developed as it is in Elizabeth Gross's work, for instance, or Pouar's work and so forth. But yeah, I wanted to latch on to your comment about the non-innocence of using these data visualization methodologies, because that's something that we obviously really need to take into account. I'll look up the program.
Yeah, thank you.
Actually, right now, because I have it somewhere. Does that kind of sort of answer your question?
Yes, no, absolutely. Well, I recognize a lot of the kind of things that you're saying in my own attempts to do something.
Oh, I have it. It's Gephi. So GEPHI. PHI. I'll type it in the chat.
Yeah.
What's also really interesting, and I wanted to take a visualization program that could actually represent the liveliness of what I was researching, because I didn't want it to become like just a distilled paralyzed object. Yeah. And so there's also this other tracking data visualization program that actually is pretty suitable, I guess, for now, that does the same with viral load and viral, the way that viruses spread. And I was actually looking into that first, but it wasn't open software, so I couldn't use that one. But it would be interesting to use a data method like that too.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I think indeed it is very tricky to create a map in the literal sense of the word that does not turn into a representation, but that rather embodies this kind of sense of accountability that you want, and that also. So the map is itself also performative, of course, because it co-creates what it maps. And for me, I guess it's also a question of how people use the map. So maybe adding a kind of participatory element to the mapping so that it becomes a participatory mapping project. That's one of the ways I'm thinking about it right now. But that's also difficult, you know, also in terms of simply how to realize such a project and who is in charge of maintaining the database and where do you, at what moment do you bring in the kind of participatory mapping aspect. But I would love to talk more about you with this at some other time, because I think we should, I mean, there's so many more interesting questions. So I will contact you if that's okay.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And now I'm passing the baton to Azucena Castro.
Hi, Evelyn.
Hi.
Thanks a lot. I think your talk was really inspiring, and I think I've learned a lot. And I was thinking about how you presented this idea of mapping, which for me was very interesting, because I was thinking about Michel de Certeau and how he considers the map as a more or less negative or hegemonic practice, because it's seen from above, is abstract, and what is more real is what is grounded in the ground. And then for me, you presented a completely different use or other uses of cartography or mapping, which more performative. It can turn this dichotomy, either the mapping is bad or is good, but it depends, or it turns to different uses. So I love that. And I was thinking about this idea that you talked about relativity or relativism, or what was the relationality?
Yeah.
How is that? I was wondering if you could develop that idea, and how is that? How do you see that in your cartographic practice?
So thank you, first of all, for that question. I'm thinking, so, and again, let me emphasize, and this is something that I think needs more research. When you're looking at Braidotti's critical cartographical method, there are references to post-colonial practices and to the fact that maps are always power charged, basically. But I think it could go deeper, and I think it would be very interesting to, for instance, also more explicitly engage with decolonial and post-colonial thought. I would say Gloria Anzalduas's border thinking, for instance, or Walter Mignolo's work would actually be very interesting to, also just to put that critical geographical and also post-colonial elements in there, which I think is needed, because let's also face it, maps have been used to colonize the world and have been used to basically capture a whole ontological reality and then make it into a possession of the colonizer, let's say. So thank you for bringing in that element again. Your question about the relativism, I spoke about relativism mostly in the sense of Haraway's Situated Knowledges project, and also all of the work that a lot of feminist and I think anti-racist critical thinkers and activists have been doing, because a lot of the critiques, and let's just say post-structuralists in general, post-structuralists, so those thinkers that focus on power analytics, basically, the critique that a lot of these folks get is basically always, oh, but now you're saying that all knowledges are basically the same, and like everything, you know, counts, and then post-truth times. I mean, you can radicalize it and then end up in post-truth times, which we are in very much right now. So I mostly during this presentation wanted to accentuate that Haraway, exactly because of her feminist origins and attachments, is not about producing relativistic knowledge, but about perspectivist knowledge, which is something different. How do you connect it to the critical cartography again? Could you maybe explain that a little bit more so that I can jump in?
Oh, no, it was just the questions that you mentioned, that you prefer or you worked with this idea of perspectivism. For me, I was thinking about maybe like Latin American anthropological feminist queer theories, Eduardo Ribeiros de Castro, that philosophies. So that I thought, oh, how interesting. Like maybe is that idea, or maybe you were thinking about another genealogy of perspective.
Yeah. Thank you. It's actually interesting because one of the people that I worked with at UC Santa Cruz was actually combining Vero de Castro's work and then Haraway's perspectivism. So yes, that would be a possibility, obviously. I do note de Castro somewhere in my monograph project, but no, the perspectivism that I'm basically or mainly referring to is really very much rooted in Haraway's thinking, because it also runs through, you know, Barat's work and I wouldn't say Braidotti's work, but Barat's work specifically. So that's why I brought it up. And I think it's going to be one of the more important concepts and ideas to keep focusing on during these times in which perspectivism has become very radicalized, right? So let's see how that goes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. And now I'm passing the baton to Cesar.
Evelien and everybody, I'm also sorry I connected a bit late. So I didn't hear, and I hope I'm not going to make a question that you already cleared through, which is very likely, but then perhaps you can elaborate further. So basically what I've noticed is that people who are in close agreement, so seem to be in the same path, and you have, I don't know, Tim Ingold seems to be saying exactly the same thing as, I don't know, 1,000 people. And then you ask him about it and he gets really annoyed with you because he's not saying anything like that. And you're like, okay, what's happening here? So and what I've detected is that there are slightly different uses of similar concepts.
Yeah.
So basically my question is, how are you dealing with kind of all the background concepts, which are perhaps not the main kind of the thing that characterizes the person, but all the concepts on which they build, and kind of those agreements or disagreements about what a concept means.
Yeah. Do you mean in my work in particular, or in like the digital cartography that was shown, or both?
In the cartography.
Yeah. Well, that was also one of the hardest things to kind of visualize, because again, let me look at a concept that I can maybe use. Well, I mean, not to get all too philosophical, but I'm lying. I am going to get philosophical, but like the idea of the notion of the subject, for instance, already, gosh, like every philosopher, every anthropologist, every critical theorist probably has their own way of approaching that idea. The way that I try to do it and visualize it is by in Excel giving it different values, so from 1 to 10 basically, and then via the purple or green or blue colors kind of represent how that concept had traveled through all these different thinkers' work. So the idea of traveling concepts, by the way, is also an idea that I've used. It's Edward Said's notion, right? So, but it is tricky to do, and I think hence why critical map making is such a personal situated project. So for me, the way that I, for instance, read Braidotis' notion of the subject, well, I would immediately then go back to Irigaray-'s critique of Lacanian psychoanalysis and bring in that heritage. I would also delve back into Foucault's understanding of the subject, Butler's understanding of the subject, and all these little different kind of influences that have kind of helped Braidotti conceptualize her own idea of subjectivity. But of course, if you are, for instance, I mean, you know, my roots very much lie in Belgium, in this crazy Western European country. And so I, for instance, immediately go to the French and the German traditions, but I can very much imagine others to go towards different traditions and making use of those specific roots to then work towards their own understanding of a concept such as subjectivity. So I think that's a very personal thing in a way. And also philosophers are petty. So every philosopher, I can say that, I do philosophy, every philosopher has, you know, a different own personal understanding of certain concepts, and then we fight, and that's apparently what we do. So yeah. Did that answer your question a little bit, or? Yeah.
So, okay, that was one. The second question, small one, or I don't know if it's small, is you were talking about how kind of a thing against representation, kind of an issue with representation, but at the same time there's an irony. And what I find a little bit striking is that it's not a representation of the world, but it's rather a representation of representations of the world.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
So it's more a map of maps. So the irony is kind of backwards.
That's good. Yeah, that's a really good point. This particular map specifically is obviously meta. It's a meta map of, and so I guess the critique of representationalism in that sense doesn't necessarily hold. And at the same time, what I got very frustrated about when I was trying to, I had this fantastic, you know, idea in my mind of like this very fluid, like map that would kind of spread out as like when you throw over a glass of water, for instance, and different glasses of water with different colors, that it would be, almost like an ocean or something, and then the colors would intermingle and things like that. Yeah, but if you bring that to an ICT person, you know, you would have to work together with an artist basically to get that kind of shown. So that was the thing that frustrated me while I was creating the map. And then, do we want to talk about representationalism? I agree with your point that it's more of a meta construct of the map that I've created, and not necessarily a map of reality, which would be a bit more problematic, I think. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Okay, so now we have kind of like 2 minutes to the end. So I think that I will let Udo say the question, but you know, we shouldn't turn it into a very long discussion. So
no, sorry, I was before. So if somebody else is there, I keep my mouth shut. No, I wanted on a round table. I would have said something, and adding on the discussions you just had. So a concept is a word, right? So like, as you said, subject would be a concept of subjectivity. But subjectivity in the map is just one word, but it has so many different meanings. So you would have, as you said, Foucauldian, Braidottian subjectivity, or all these. So that's a very big difficulty in the legend, or whatever the ingredients of the map that you are using.
Yeah.
So I was looking for the word legend before I put it in the notes. And I have, actually, and I have, can I just, another question? I was wondering, why is Braidotti in this corner and not over there, and Latour here and there? So it's based, I mean, there must be an idea, but that would maybe also something that would a legend explain or show, and I know, of course, then it's getting very difficult.
Well, this really was the kind of automatic outcome of the way, see, this is the thing that I was struggling with, because of course, a map and a visualization like this is the direct outcome of me programming, of me, first of all, coding stuff, which again is not an innocent project, then putting the coding into Excel and then programming it so that it appears like this. But actually the way that it is then represented, I found very interesting to see that, yeah, indeed, Braidotti is here, and then Latour, of course, is hidden very far away. Let me quickly, such a big fan, obviously. So Latour is here. If I go back to the bigger one, voila. It actually has to do with the linkages between the notes of the different thinkers. And if you, the whole point of me, and this was kind of an intuitive feeling, and again, non-innocent project, right? The whole point of this map was that it was gonna kind of emphasize what I in the end found while writing the whole dissertation, is that there is a difference to be made between new materialist research as such and the maybe more critical forms of new materialisms that focus on not flattening the relations between different beings. And I'm actually looking at Cecilia because you wrote a piece about that with I think Iris and Katrin. And it was very interesting to then notice that you do indeed get kind of a sort of visualized separation between, separation is not the right word, but a visualized difference between the more actor network related theories and the speculative realisms and the more, let's say, feminist critical race studies and queer oriented new materialisms on the map itself. If I can still, yeah, there are groups. There's one group in which it's kind of like depicted and you see the difference between the, but yeah, it's been a while since I used it, but you can check it out online later and experiment with it yourself. But did I kind of answer your question a bit?
Well, if I may, what I understood is you didn't decide where Braidotti is being put on the map, but it's the algorithm of the software that we're using. So next question would be, if you would have been able to influence it, how would you have, what would have been the, I don't, by lack of better word, the structure or system of organizing the dots, besides the connections, also the situatedness on the map?
Well, I mean, yeah, and I understand your question. I mean, that would be a possibility, but it would be exactly the thing. That's kind of an a priori kind of construction of the map, and that was something that I explicitly wanted to avoid, because I wanted to in the encounter with the concepts and the indexes and the citational politics that was happening in all of the materials that I went through, I wanted to see where that would basically take me in the creation of that map. And I think the non-new materialist way of tackling this would be to indeed think about, well, Latour, big red cross over Latour, I'm just using Latour again, Haraway and Braidotti and whatever, but yeah, that would exactly kind of defeat the purpose of a critical cartography, I think. But I get where you're coming from, because you have your architectural background and you do, and actually, to be honest, that's how I wanted to tackle it at first too, because as a philosopher I also wanted to immediately like grasp reality and then make a nice legend and like these pre-conceptualized structures, but in this research it wasn't possible.
I mean the other way, because of course any kind of ordering system that you would impose is biased. And then the next thing is you make at least 2 or 3 or 4 maps to see how, so once based on this and once on that, and then you see how figures shift. I don't know. I mean, I'm just...
No, that would be really, really interesting to do, actually. And it is something that I want to do with another thing that I'm working on right now, which is genealogies of intersectionality and new materialisms, and actually do make various maps and see where they overlap. That would be really interesting. So yeah. Yeah.
And
Okay.
I think that this is the perfect gesture to kind of wrap up this session. But I would like to absolutely thank once again, Evelien, and please just join me in this, applause online, which is, and I would love to also thank everyone who participated, who took part in the discussion and, just being here right now with us. So please do follow our website and the kind of announcements of upcoming seminars. I mean, as you know, this has been recorded, so we'll kind of try to organize ourselves technologically, as we spoke so much about technology and agency of that kind of matters as well. And then basically to be continued, and maybe for just my team members, we reconvene in a meeting after the seminar in a different room, so that they know as well. So thank you so much. Take the best of care. Have a lovely afternoon and evening, and yes, till next time. Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.